Okay, it's 5 past, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody again for joining us for the Martin Center 52nd series lectures here at the Department of Architecture at the University of Cambridge. Our theme for this series is living building, which is understood broadly to mean that we think of buildings often as static objects, but in fact they are energetic metabolisms, taking in material from their sources, adapting that material throughout their lives, and then of course dissipating that material at their end of life, and seeing how that relates to different topics such as ecology, as well as inhabitation. And I'm very pleased today to welcome Adib Dada of theOtherDada as our lecturer. He's going to speak to us about building interspecies habitat related to this theme of living and building. I'll briefly introduce Adib's background and the abstract of his talk, and then let him take it off from there. So to begin, Adib Dada is the founder of theOtherDada, Regenerative Consultancy and Architecture firm, with the mission of activating projects across architecture, living systems, and art. Based on biomimicry thinking, TOD's work promotes a symbiotic relationship between nature and the built environment by exploring new ways of creating generous and regenerative buildings. In essence, working with nature to develop resilient and generous cities. Excuse me while I interrupt myself for a moment here. I'm seeing in the chat that our audio connection is not perfect. I think that's from the university's network. So as soon as Adib begins, the connection should be stable. So I apologize if this introduction has interruptions, but the presentation itself should be clear. To continue, Adib earned a bachelor's in architecture at the American University of Beirut in Lebanon, a master's degree in the Interactive Telecommunications Program at NYU, USA, a biomimicry graduate certificate from the Biomimicry Institute in Arizona State University, and a certificate in ecosystem restoration design. Adib has been recognized in Apollo's magazine's 40 Under 40 as a patron of the arts in the Middle East, and was listed as one of Good Magazine's Good 100 for his project Beirut RiverLESS, which aims to regenerate the deteriorated Beirut River. Adib is a fellow of the Middle East Leadership Initiative, a member of the Aspen Global Leadership Network, and a Bio Leadership Fellow, which is a community helping to transform human systems and the paradigm of leadership by working with nature. Adib is also firmly committed to the UN Decade of Action, engaged on rewilding the city and reclaiming public space by planting native Miyawaki forests and urban landfills through his new initiative, theOtherForest, a nature-based tool for ecological and social regeneration. Finally, a brief abstract of what Adib will present to us today, beginning with the quote, "The nature of trees and grass is one thing, but there are many degrees of nature. Concrete can be nature. Interstellar spaces are also nature. There is human nature. In the city, you have to have a new nature. Maybe you have to create that nature," by Isamu Noguchi from 1970. This is to introduce that we always flee from cities and go far to nature, but how can we reinvent that urban escaping and grow more nature in the heart of the city? Our new role as designers is to create conditions conducive to other life, not just that of the human species, but the whole biosphere. What if we can enable the native plants, birds, insects, and fungi to reclaim their rightful place as well? In this talk, we will explore theOtherDada's trajectory from an environmental architecture firm building habitat for humans to a regenerative consultancy working on master planning projects, transitioning into forest making to provide habitat for wildlife in urban areas. Together, we can build interspecies habitats for humans and other creatures alike to thrive. That being said, Adib, thank you very much for joining us and being so generous with your time. We'll have 45 minutes to an hour presentation, followed with hopefully about half an hour of Q&A, both from our in-person attendees and our online. And Adib, that's everything from me. Please take it away.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, we see your presentation now, but not full screen.
How about now?
Now it's full screen, that's perfect.
Okay, so hello everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about building interspecies habitat for humans and other creatures to thrive. The kind of structure of this presentation is going to be about like our different building approaches. So the building approach of theOtherDada, what are some of the challenges and the inspirations behind our work, the building of human habitats, so architecture, the building of urban habitats, so more urban design scale. Then we're going to stop for a brief moment to watch a a short documentary about our work that can give you kind of the context from which we're coming from. Then I'll resume with building other habitats, so talking about afforestation and healing habitats, and then we'll end on interspecies habitats. So just briefly, theOtherDada is a regenerative consultancy and architecture firm. We've been working on urban afforestation in Lebanon and the Middle East. We cover areas such as architecture, consultancy, afforestation, and research. So our building approach, basically, we started by looking at the city, and at the moment, cities are not serving us well. Governments pay millions every year in environmental degradation, mitigation, and healthcare costs. Lebanon has the highest death rate of early death due to air pollution. We have 6 degrees Celsius urban heat increase. We have very little green space per capita, less than 1 square meter. Pollution clouds, alarming cancer rates, and cardiovascular diseases. But these challenges are not only local, they're global. So our urban areas are flooding. Temperatures in cities are rising. Forests are burning and deserts are expanding. Rivers all over the world are being dammed. And as in the case of Lebanon and other developing countries, these are being funded by international institutions such as the World Bank. Air pollution has reached alarming levels. So as I said, we have recorded the highest death rate due to air pollution in all of the Middle East, North Africa region. So this brings me to this question: how do we address the twin crises of both biodiversity loss and climate change? I feel like the biodiversity loss crisis is being eclipsed by climate change because it's probably like even less tangible than the climate crisis that people are starting to feel. And for me, the way that we do that is we start by really understanding our place within nature. So if you look on the left, like this is the typical human lens, human-centric lens. So we have man at the top, woman below, and then mammals, and eventually reaching the invertebrates and fungi at the bottom of the pyramid. Whereas we need to really understand that we are nature, and so we're not there to save nature. We're not there to save the planet. We have to rethink our relationship and how we coexist in nature. And this is going to take moving beyond just mere sustainability into regeneration. So moving from having the economy as the end goal and transitioning into an ecological perspective where ecology and safe and healthy life on the planet is the end goal, with the economy being just a tool that will push society to be able to live safely in this ecology and on planet Earth. And also thinking of, we need to move beyond sustainability into interdependence. So the health of the planet, the climate, the ecosystem are also completely linked to the health, to human health, social health, and equity, which is intimately linked to the health of the built environment, because this is where we spend most of our time. So how can we as designers create conditions to support other life? Not that just of humans, but all other life forms that we share this planet with. So we look to nature to inspire a better built environment. And this brings us to biomimicry. So in brief, biomimicry is the conscious emulation of 3.8 billion years of time-tested wisdom. So life has existed on Earth for 3.8 billion years and has evolved so many organisms that have had to deal with far worse conditions than we are in right now. And if we just humble ourselves enough and look at those organisms, we can really understand what are the next steps that we need to take. So a couple of brief examples. Nature has developed the whole coral reef ecosystem using only 2 kinds of polymers, whereas our human landfills contain more than 350 kinds of polymers, and that's just for a landfill. So how can nature be so elegant and simple? Termite mounds use 0 fossil fuels to keep their structures within 1 degree Celsius all year long, whereas our cities require 20% of the world's annual energy use to keep our structures within 1 degree Celsius. Basically, human systems are quite simple. They haven't evolved, they haven't matured yet, whereas biological systems are complex. So human systems are linear instead of being closed loop. They're wasteful instead of being zero waste. They're centralized and monocultural instead of being distributed and diverse. They are obviously fossil fuel dependent instead of running on current solar income. And they are extractive instead of being regenerative. So after my studies in biomimicry, I came across this building certification, which is called the Living Building Challenge. And that one for me really was kind of going a step further. So it was going beyond mere sustainability. And it was really looking at, what they call the petals. So these 7 petals. So place, restoring a healthy relationship with nature. Water, creating developments that operate within the water balance of a given place and climate. Energy, relying only on current solar income. Health and happiness, creating environments that optimize physical and psychological health and well-being. Materials, endorsing products that are safe for all species through time. Equity, supporting a just and equitable world. And finally, beauty, celebrating design that uplifts the human spirit. So I saw this was pretty much inspired as well by biomimicry, and that became a reference for me in terms of how I approach my architectural and built projects. So I'm going to take you through our building human habitats, so kind of basic approach to architecture. And the central question here is, what if our buildings were safe and regenerative, free from toxic chemicals and beneficial to the surrounding communities, considering the whole life cycle of a project, its functionality, quality, and the experience of its users? So in biomimicry, there are 3 levels of emulation. We can emulate the form. The simplest way of emulation is emulating the form of a natural organism. We can emulate the process, or we can emulate the system. So our buildings can act like trees. The leaves cool the air through evapotranspiration. The roots and leaves and trunk provide a habitat for many other types of organisms. The roots stabilize the soil and prevent erosion. The leaves filter air pollution. They also absorb sound, block rainfall, and the leaves also provide shade and reduce wind speed. Going back to the termites and termite mounds. So how does nature control heat? So termites are these really tiny organisms, about 2 millimeters long, build these really incredible, huge structures that, their challenge living in a hot environment is maintaining a constant temperature and protecting from predators. So their solution is to build these self-cooling mounds that ventilate, cool, and heat entirely through natural means by using biomass and cleverly positioned openings. So they are able to maintain optimal and constant temperature year-round. So we emulated this process in our project, which we built in Saudi Arabia back in 2017. So in Landform House, we used a hybrid design to improve the cooling and the indoor air quality through sensor-controlled openings. So we really looked at the traditional ways of cooling buildings in the desert. We looked at termite mounds, and we put that into a CFD analysis model. So we modeled our project and put that through the CFD simulation and reshaped the building according to the direction of the wind that was favorable for us to be able to naturally ventilate the building. And then we installed mechanically activated louvers that were controlled by sensors that were able to gauge the temperature inside and outside, and then open these louvers at very specific times where it was most beneficial to ventilate through natural means. And in this case, overall in this project, we were able to reduce 50% of energy energy consumption through our high insulation and through this system of natural ventilation. And there is one room in the house which benefits the most from this system, where they almost never use any air conditioning year-round. So we call it an inhabited landscape, and it's really also kind of again inspired by the termite mounds. So the termites, to be able to protect themselves from predators, they have very small openings that are quite hidden, so that they are not really accessible. And in the case of Saudi Arabia, our problem is not really predators, but it's is privacy. So by law, we are, you have to close off and you have to build high fences so that you protect the privacy of the homes. And so here what we did is we really increased the thermal mass, and we sort of merged the fence within the building. So you can't really tell what is the fence and what is the building, and you can't really tell what is behind this. And all of it is planted with indigenous native species that are drought tolerant. Even the pool is basically serving to cool the airs around it, acting through evapotranspiration, and which is why the landscape around the pool is different. It's a landscape that will benefit from the evapotranspiration, and the pool itself is treated without any chemicals. So again, we are thinking of the whole ecosystem. How do we provide a safe space not only for humans to be able to swim, but for other organisms and birds to be able to come and drink from this water without getting poisoned? And the landscape changes according to different places. So we've created different microclimates depending on the sun orientation, on the buildings around it. And so this is why each section of the home has a totally different landscape. All the way to the rooftop, where we opted for a kind of prairie-like types of grasses, and where we, as you can see on the right side, we have the solar panels that are integrated within the building. So the building responds to the orientation and the slope of the solar panels, and so the building is shaped by this, and this renewable energy is not just a technical add-on onto the building. Another project in Saudi Arabia, the Home of Innovation. This won the Green Builder Award in 2016. But here, just what I want to show you is that it's not just about the buildings. Like, we really also need to get to the interiors. So here we're looking at recycled materials used for the flooring. We're looking at a very flexible layout that can be changed for the different needs of the exhibition. And also relying on projections and things like that can totally transform the space without having to change the architecture inside. And even going down to the detail of the furniture. So the furniture here, the fabrics are all organic certified fabrics. They are fair trade. The carpet is upcycled from old carpets that have been reworked to the design that we did. So just all of this kind of goes to show that we don't just stop at the architecture, but there's the whole, like all of the minute details that we must get into in order to have a holistic project. So moving on to a larger scale, at the urban scale, this is one of the challenges we had in one of our projects. So the site used to be a mangrove back in the 70s, and it was reclaimed into this kind of like dead zone in 2010. And so when we were approached to do this project, our first approach was to basically, how can we recreate that? How can we bring life back to the site? How can we recreate the mangrove ecosystem that was there before? So it was really a process of healing the site from the trauma that it had been through, so that it could support the life of, this is a very big family compound, so it could support the life of this family of like 80 people and support the life of the mangrove and all of the other organisms that rely on them. And so we really focus on this aspect of water and seeing how all of the water that can be that is being used within the project can be treated and kind of giving back to this mangrove and helping us reclaim the mangrove. On an even larger scale, the site in Oman is about 5,000 is 5 square kilometers. And here I was consulting for an architecture firm in Italy, and they had this big project, and I mean, they had this kind of pretty conventional approach to the planning of that site. So the way that we rethought it is basically we research what are the different ecosystems that exist in Oman. So those are coastal deserts, canyons, wadis, oases, prairies, and food production areas. And so we divided the master plan into all of these different areas. So for example, it was a requirement that they needed to have a golf course. But instead of having to import all this grass and having to treat it with chemical fertilizer and all of that, here we decided that the golf course would be the equivalent of the native prairie that they have in Oman. We decided that some areas would stay as a desert. Some areas where food production needed to happen were modeled on the model of oases. But we also took it a step further in that, so we're looking at the desert ecosystem. We really study what types of flora exist there, what type of fauna is there as well. So we kind of really divide this master plan into different ecological zones. And each ecological zone has its own fauna, its own flora that becomes an inspiration for the materials that we would use. And that also guide us in terms of how do we build differently in the desert ecological zone versus the oasis ecological zone versus the prairie ecological zone. So each one would then have a different set of materials, and these are not, again, not just for aesthetic reasons, but really in terms of dealing with the wind, dealing with the heat, dealing with the water, and all of these. So it's kind of helped us set a set of guideline, and so each ecological zone had the set of building guidelines that we developed for it. And this takes us into the building of other habitats. And basically here the thinking is even bigger. What if our cities were as effective and generous as a forest, providing not only for ourselves, but for other species as well, and in perfect balance with the operating conditions of planet Earth? So by using biomimicry at the systems level, so we saw we use biomimicry at the form level, at the process level, and here we're looking at it at the systems level. We developed the Beirut River Genius of Place, and the idea is to bring back the ecosystem services of the local ecosystems to improve the resilience of the city and the living conditions of the communities nearby. And we propose to plant dense native forests to further improve resilient cities. The benefits of urban forests are fighting climate change, filtering air pollution, cooling down cities, protecting the biodiversity of birds, animals, managing urban floods, improving physical and mental health. And basically also, they're perfectly aligned with UN SDG goals number 6 on clean water and sanitation, 11 on sustainable cities, 13 on climate action, and 15 life on land. And we use a very specific methodology called, which is a Japanese technique called the Miyawaki method of forest making, because it is scientifically proven to be one of the best ways for cities to mitigate the climate crisis. Since the 70s, thousands of native urban forests have been successfully planted worldwide. So these are dense native forests that work in any environment from the tropics to harsh deserts. They are fast growing. They become maintenance free in less than 3 years' time. And they can be planted in very small. So the smallest forest we've planted is 1 square meter. two very big plots of degraded land. So worldwide, there's projects that are upwards than 2 square kilometers. And this is the kind of like international recognition of this methodology. Project Drawdown lists it as the #1 solution for cities to mitigate climate change. The World Economic Forum calls it a secret weapon against climate change. And the mayor of Paris is using this methodology to fulfill the promise of planting upwards than 170,000 trees in the capital city of Paris. So in comparing Miyawaki forests with conventional landscaping, Miyawaki forests are 10 times faster growing. They're also 30 times denser, which means they can sequester 30 times more pollution and 30 times more CO2. They are completely organic. We don't use any pesticides or fertilizers. They are very biodiverse. They require half the investment than conventional landscaping, and they become water and maintenance free in less than 3 years' time. They can be planted in any kind of shape or design that we can think of. They can include art. So this is a project in the US where an artist installed these sculptures that will eventually grow into the trees, and the trees will carry them up in their branches. So they will evolve with the forest. This is one of our projects where we used it as a fence, and you can see how the growth in just 8 months can really transform these dull urban areas. It's been planted in the desert. So this is in Iran. In 2 years' time, the trees are upward than 2 meters. And we've been using it as an educational tool. So planting forests with the youngest generation. So going to the Beirut River, which has been a research project of mine for the past 9 years now. So this is our inspiration, the natural site of the Beirut River. And this is the Beirut River in the city. So from an ongoing dumping of industrial waste to the dumping of garbage in the river during the trash crisis of 2015, to the stormwater challenges that the city is facing. So the question is, how does nature manage the flow of water? So in biomimicry, the life principles tell us nature embodies resilience through variation, redundancy, and decentralization. So some of the interventions we came up with were implementing blue-green streets, sponge parks, and green roofs, which would then help us in protecting natural and man-made assets, maintaining ecosystems as well as infrastructure, and ensuring public health. So we planted the very first native urban forest in Lebanon, Beirut's RiverLESS forest. So as you can see, this is the site that we're working on. This is the Beirut River, which was encased in concrete in 1968, effectively killing the river because it was no longer an ecosystem. And this whole area became an urban landfill, which we reclaimed back in 2019, cleaning it up from all types of trash and debris, and uncompacting the soil, feeding it, and then planting the first phase of the project, which you can see here on the corner. And this picture was taken about 8 months later as we were planting the second phase of the project. So you can see how in 8 months, the trees have already grown. And so the transformation is quite fast and immediate. This is a sampling of the species that we have in our Miyawaki forest in Beirut, from 2 different types of oak trees, pine trees, sage, laurel, bayleaf, pistachio trees, and so on. A lot of those are edible species and medicinal species as well. So this is the site on the first day of planting. You can see the trees and shrubs are really, really tiny. They're about 10 to 15 centimeters tall. And this is the site only 5 months later. And this is 2 years later. So in 2 years' time, we really managed to completely transform this area and be able to bring people back to this once unloved area. This is again a picture. This is 1 year apart. This is us with the volunteers preparing the site, and this is just 1 year later, again with the volunteers maintaining our saplings. And this is the final stretch we planted a few months ago. So this is it after planting. So you can see the river on the right side, and then you can see this whole plot, which is about 2,000 square meters, which is planted with 5,800 trees and shrubs. So more than 500 volunteers helped us in planting this project throughout the past 3 years. And the way that the forest making process goes is that we first start with the site selection. Then we travel to the closest mature forest that exists, and we go there with a botanist and we study not only the types of species that are there, but also the relationships between the species and the proportion by which these species coexist with each other. So we found out, for example, in our case, that our forests are predominantly oak forests. And then this is followed by maple trees, and then pine trees, and so on and so forth. Then we excavate the site. So we dig down to 1 meter's depth. The reason is to uncompact the soil, especially in urban areas. The soil is so compacted that water runs off, and that the roots of the trees are not able to penetrate into the ground in search of water. We also use this opportunity to clean up the site from all kinds of trash. Then we prepare the land and we start planting. And after that, we have between 2 to 3 years of maintenance, which includes watering, de-weeding, remulching, rope tying, and compost tea making. And this part of maintenance is really crucial for not only for the trees, but also for us in terms of raising awareness among the community, because they have this 3-year period where they're actually actively engaged, not only on planting, but on maintaining and on visiting the forest and checking that everything is okay. So this builds up ownership of the community to the forest, and it becomes a kind of a win-win relationship. These are some of the few other projects that we've done. So this is a road median in the most polluted city in Lebanon. You can see in the back, this is what we call the power plant of death. So this city has the highest death rate in the whole MENA region. So we transformed this disused road median from this kind of like dead grassy patch into a tiny urban forest. We've also taken over a public park, which is completely concreted over and asphalted over. And we dug up, we destroyed the asphalt. And again, with the help of the community, we planted this type of linear forest that could start giving shade to these pathways. And this project is up in our is in a ski resort. So we do have snow in Lebanon, up on high elevations in the winter. And we did this project for a private client. So when we work on public projects, we work as on a non-profit basis. So we raise funds, grants, we do crowdfunding. And then we also work with private clients to transform their private lands into sustainable landscapes. So here we regenerated this kind of overgrazed land, planting it with 15 different native species, among which our famous cedar tree, which had been completely decimated from this area for over the past few hundred years. And the way we measure success is basically first by looking at the regeneration of biodiversity. The bees coming back, the butterflies, fungi. We also look at the soil regeneration, because we know that healthy soil sequesters a lot of CO2, so even more than the forest itself. So this is why it's essential that we rebuild the soil. And here we can see earthworms coming back. We can see the soil has become rich and brown, whereas it used to be more of a dead, sandy soil without any life in it. And we also just actually measure the growth. So we've marked a few of the trees and shrubs, and every few months we take measurements for the height and the girth of these saplings, and we take a monthly picture from the same angles so that we can keep track of it. But all of this work is basically also needs to be told. So we work a lot on building the narrative. And this led Waterbairn Off the Fence to reach out to us and actually produce a documentary about our work. So I'd like to share this documentary with you. It's about 4.5 minutes long. So just bear with me while I load it.
Situated on the Mediterranean coast, Beirut is Lebanon's largest city. Political chaos and economic collapse have pushed it to the brink.
Lebanon's economy has crashed into a tailspin.
The whole country is facing an environmental crisis.
Beirut streets drowning in trash.
In 2020, Beirut was hit by one of the biggest explosions in history. $3,000 tons of incorrectly stored ammonium nitrate exploded in the port, flattening a huge part of the city. This was the latest chapter in the city's man-made environmental crisis, and it almost cost eco-activist Adib Dada his life.
I was at the office. I had brought my daughter with me when the explosion happened. We heard the sound, and instinctively I hunched over my daughter. The ceiling collapsed on us, but I had to literally pull me out from under the rubble.
Adib's daughter was fortunately unharmed, but in protecting her, it turned out he'd broken his back.
One of my vertebrae was completely collapsed.
Narrowly avoiding death and paralysis, Adib felt his efforts to cleanse the city had come to an end.
I was lying in bed, and there was nothing that I could physically do. Then after a few days, I felt re-energized, and I actually felt how important it was not only to continue the work that we were doing, but to really ramp up the campaign and really scale it up.
Adib Dada is the leading voice in a green movement. He and his team are fighting pollution with tools and native saplings.
This was a great way to lead our green revolution, not by complaining about what the city had become, but actually showing how we wanted the city to look like. Beirut has very little public space, let alone green space. Lebanon has the highest death rate due to air pollution in all of the Middle East. This explosion definitely added to the toxic load of Lebanon. A cloud of toxicity took over the city and went up into the mountains.
Adib and his team are healing their broken city by planting trees in the urban center, which will grow into tiny forests with the pioneering Miyawaki method, developed by botanist Dr. Akira Miyawaki in the 70s for Tokyo, the densest city in the world. Learning from international experts, Adib mastered the art of mimicking larger forest ecosystems on a smaller, tightly packed scale. High-density planting promotes faster growth, so being 30 times denser means that they can reduce 30 times more pollution from the surrounding air.
Our forests are maintenance-free. We only plant native trees that for millennia have cared for themselves. Native forests support native biodiversity, the native insects and the native microorganisms in the soil.
Adib began by planting the first mini forest alongside the most polluted part of the city, the Beirut River. Concreted over in the 60s, decades of pollution, factory dumping and raw sewage turned this once vibrant natural water source into a toxic stream.
Since Roman times, the river was used as a source of fresh water. Then the river died. Since it was encased in concrete, it became a no man's land. The forest will help in restoring the water cycle. It will help in regulating the temperature of the city. We had hundreds of people, some of them for the first time in their life coming and planting a tree. People now have a reason to come back into this once unloved area. Tree planting on degraded lands is proven as the best way for cities to be able to mitigate climate change. The forest can be planted anywhere, as long as you have access to soil and sunlight, the tiniest place.
Adib has planted 7 urban native forests so far. But this is just the start. If it can be done in Beirut, it can be done anywhere. A movement has started to create tiny forests across the globe. Each forest acts as a carbon sink, combating climate change and creating a shared space for humans and wildlife. Despite its tortured past, today Beirut has an army of people willing to fight for a better future.
My hope is that people will be empowered enough to demand change themselves.
So basically, in response to all the challenges that the city has been going through, we're also looking into building healing habitats. And so we've been dedicating some of our forests specifically to healing. From the horrors of the Beirut explosion, while we remember the victims of the explosion. So we planted the Remembrance Forest, where we had 254 trees planted, one for each of the victims of the explosion. And that was just a very simple gesture that came out of a need to kind of do something. And we just literally wrote down the names of every single victim and planted those into the ground with the trees. So now families of victims have a place to come and have some solace and have some, watching something grow. We've also been working in schools that have been destroyed by the explosion, and planting tiny forests in the usually concrete playgrounds. So ripping out the concrete and inviting the kids to come with us. So creating new memories with them of their schools and giving them access to some much needed nature. We've also been using art as a vehicle to address these challenges that we're going through. And so we started this year, Art, Ecology and the Commons, an interdisciplinary program to bring artistic and ecological practices together in the aim of building a community around Beirut RiverLESS forest. So these are some examples of the projects. So this is an installation done by an artist on site. This is etched onto the concrete wall of the river, and it's basically a eulogy for the Beirut River. And it reads, "Here lies that which was sculpted by water." And it's the Beirut River died in 1968. This is another kind of like a project that was done by a Palestinian artist, Mirna Bemieh. And she recreated the traditional water feast that used to happen on the banks of the river back when the river was still natural. And so it was her way of bringing people back together and rethinking the water feast literally by distilling plants and the leaves of the plants from the forest into waters and having a water tasting of all of the different flavors. And artist Petra Serhal, who learned these traditional ways of healing the body and spirit, and started hosting these nature healing sessions inside of the forest. So the OtherForest is our nature-based tool for ecological and social regeneration in cities. By implementing this urban afforestation, we can regenerate degraded leftover lands into a shared space between humans and native fauna and flora, all the while tackling urban flooding, reducing pollution, and the urban heat island effect. So we are reclaiming degraded land as public space, regenerating ecological systems, and regenerating social connections as well. So far, in the past 3 years, we've planted 10 forests. We've reclaimed more than 3,000 square meters of degraded land, planted more than 10,000 trees and shrubs of 26 different native species, had more than 800 volunteers, 5 awards, and all with the goal of empowering these communities. So in building interspecies habitat, the question is, how do we bring all of this together? How do we bring architecture and consultancy and forests and research and academia all together? And so this is the question that is still lingering in my mind. So I started my career as an architect, working on kind of like conventional architecture, then researching and learning more, moving into sustainability, and then beyond sustainability into biomimicry, and shifting now to this kind of like the building of habitats for other kinds of species. So in the next few years, it's really going to be about how do we really bring all of these things together and not having them done separately, but how do we really rethink them as the interdependent systems that they should be. So we have the opportunity to tackle both the biodiversity loss and the climate crises by working with nature to transition our cities into shared spaces for humans and other life to thrive. Thank you.